This is a great honor to be here. I thank you all for coming. It's just I can't tell you how moving it is for me to serve as interlocutor to one of my teachers. I want to begin just with a short introduction to this book and to explain why this is such a beautiful and important book. I was at a liberal Zionist event, or in a Zionist event not long ago, where a liberal Zionist said to, there were 4 Zionists on the stage talking about how they were defending Israel in this day and age and how hard it is. And the youngest of them said, you know, I recently had a debate with a Palestinian, and this man did not speak with an accent. He spoke in an American idiom of human rights and equal rights. In previous generations, Palestinians were seen as foreign. This is what we're up against, is people who are speaking in a very recognizable Western idiom. And not that that should affect a cause, but inevitably these questions of manner and tone do affect a cause. And I think that what is so spectacular about this book is that Ghada has taken a form that is very familiar to people in this country, which is the memoir, and she has turned it to just a noble purpose. And when I think of memoir, the only reason I read memoir is to get some really hard human truth from someone else's experience. And it's very hard to convey just how many hard truths there are in this book. I think, let me begin by asking you, why did you write this book?
Okay, why did I write it? Now, today, indeed, is the 98th anniversary of the Balfour Declaration, which you just heard about. And you might well ask, why are we talking about the Balfour Declaration? And of course, it is precisely relevant to the question of return, which is the subject of this book. Because, as I think everybody knows here, it was Balfour's declaration which established, which was the foundation stone of what became Israel. And what became Israel was responsible for the expulsion of the Palestinian people, and after that, following on from that, their desire, their passion, their right to return. So that is the link with this event in 1917, which destroyed and wrecked the Palestinian people. Now, the question of why it's called Return, now, if people, I don't know how many, from where you're sitting, can you see the cover at all, the picture on the cover? Well, don't worry if you can't. What it's showing is open palms, like that, and across them is an old-fashioned key, a long old-fashioned key. Well, the significance of it is, of course, that the key represents the actual keys, that when people were expelled, the Palestinians were expelled from their homeland, many of them took the front door keys because they didn't think they'd be away for long. And they said, well, no, we have to have the key because when we go back, we have to open the door. And as you know, they never went back, but they kept the key as a living memory of what had happened. And I assure you, there is not a Palestinian living who does not understand this picture, who does not understand its significance, and the whole thing has become iconic for the Palestinians. Now, that really is a long response to your question, because I wanted to give the background to why return is such an important issue for Palestinians. If you say return, the right to return, every Palestinian understands what you're talking about. So this book is called Return, though it is not about how the refugees can all get up and go back. It's not. But it's about the theme of return. Return runs through the book, the theme of return, because it's so crucial, it's so fundamental to the Palestinian experience.
You know, one of the most beautiful images, this book has so many great images in it that crystallize Rada's return to Palestine in 2005, 2006, 2007, and one of them is her memory of Fatima, a woman who worked for her family, lying on the veranda, the tiled veranda of the house in Katamon. And the book, in that connection, Rada tries to grasp, she's trying to get back to this memory of childhood by returning to these actual places. And it involves her going to Katamon, to the house, and I want Rada to tell us that story. And it also involves her trying to find Fatima, who lived in the village of Maliha, which is, I think, now where the zoo is in Jerusalem.
Yeah, the biblical zoo.
And so one of the most painful stories in the book is when you try to go find Fatima. But tell us, can you tell us about going back to your childhood home and the invitation that you received and what happened?
Okay. Well, in a way, this is funny, although ultimately, of course, it's not funny. I received one day an email from an extremely unlikely source, namely the New York Times bureau chief in Jerusalem. And I was, at that time, I was in the West Bank, saying to me, I've just finished your memoir, In Search of Fatima, and I realized that where I'm living, I think I'm living above your house, your old house. And he, in that email, invites me to visit him to see if indeed it was the old house. So, most intrigued, I went, we agreed a date, and I went, and yes, there he was, living in an apartment which had been built on the top of our house. Our house was a villa on one floor. They don't have 2 stories. But this had been built at some time, and the New York Times bought it in something like 1983, and its bureau chiefs have been living in it ever since. Now, this man, called Stephen Erlanger, at the time, he was the bureau chief at the time, he invited me and said, I thought, first of all, to confirm this, if this is your house. And so, yes, I said to him, yes, indeed, it is my house. And he said, I'd like to take some photographs of you in it. I know that it's difficult for Palestinians to find people who allow them to come and see their old houses. But he said there is a very nice Israeli family living in the house. They're friends of mine, and they would love for you to feel free to come and have a look. The thing about that visit, though, was that apart from being intrigued about this man inviting me, I thought, actually, I have to put him on the spot. I have to ask him, having read the book, living above what was my old house, which I confirmed, did he feel something about that? Was there something wrong with that? Did he think that this was cruel, that this was hurtful or something? Well, I can only tell you, and you must read the book, he was absolutely evasive from the start. I said, well, now, you've read the book. You see what's happened. You are here because I'm not here, if you see what I mean. And what do you feel about, does that make you feel about Israel? And he said, well, there's history and, nothing's black and white and things are very difficult. And he wanted to move on the whole time. And I went back several times and said, look, do you actually think it is right, morally right, to throw people out and put yourselves in their place? What do you think? I never got a straight answer. But I think he felt badly because he insisted I came down. He took hundreds of photographs of me in this house, and I always felt that was his way of saying, look, I'm sorry, without saying it.
How painful is it for you to go to Katamon and see that house?
I've been a number of times, and the first time that I finally made it, which I've described towards the end of In Search of Fatima, I found it extremely sad, extremely painful, extremely sad. And I remember standing there. It was the house, although, you know, what I remembered of it. And to me, the thing that was so striking was the way that time was dead. We were dead. The people who we were at that time were dead. Fatima was dead. You know, it was a very curious feeling, a feeling of extinction that actually, not so much, you know, that this was our house. I remember where I played here, and this is the swing, and whatever. It was so much the feeling of having been wiped out, erased by a force that was way beyond us. The Zionist project, its determination to place its own people in our place.
And I should emphasize that one of the, this desire to return and get our property back, this desire that is widely shared among the exiled Palestinian population, is the reason that her father, at the end of his life, her father, Rada's father, lived to be over 100 and became quite famous in England. He moved to Amman just to be as close as he could to Palestine. And so this kind of hole in the soul of this family is a very big theme in the book. And I want to bring up an interchange in the book that I found extremely squeamish making. Rada is very good at capturing these moments of interaction, as she did with Stephen Erlanger. And there's a moment where she is trying to find, it's very important for her to go find Fatima, this woman who was left to take care of the house when the family went to Damascus. And they said, oh, you know, just take care of the house, visit, stay there. And then they never heard from Fatima again, this woman who had been so close to Rada as a girl. And so she's in this quest to find Fatima. And she's speaking to a friend of hers in England, a Jewish psychiatrist. I think I have this right.
Yeah.
And he says, oh, you got to get over this. And, you know, it's the Jewish homeland too, and you've just got to accept it. We're there now. I found it was just such a shocking statement, because this is a psychiatrist who's supposed to be so sensitive to someone's feelings. But the politics, the tribal politics of the matter overwhelmed his sense of his sensitivity to your psyche. And so can you, I'm sure I'm getting that wrong. Can you tell us a little about that interaction?
No, you've got it remarkably right. Look, this was a psychiatrist. He was really a very remarkable man. I really liked him. And he had a lot of wisdom. He had helped a lot of people. And, you know, he was a nice person.
Uh-huh.
And he...
That nice.
I mean, he seemed very nice, but he knew that I was very involved with the question of Palestine and so on. And he said it, this is the thing that was a killer, he said it in the sense of somebody trying to make me feel better, trying to give me some peace of mind. So he said, look, you know, let go, he said to me, just let go. You know, talking about himself, he said, you know, we came to this country, that's England, we had nothing. We came from Lithuania, we had nothing. I had no shoes, or the shoes that I had holes in them. We were so poor. But slowly and surely we built up our lives and we made good, and, you know, here I am, a psychiatrist. You see, this is how it happens. So you too must learn that you can do this, but only if you let go the past. And I remember saying to him, but you see, for me, the past is the present. The present is the past. He had no idea what I was talking about. So, yeah, it was quite memorable.
So when I began by saying that this book has such hard human truths in it, You know, one of them, I think you've touched on one of the most painful and important truths in the book, which is the degree to which Radha is trying to figure out how much the past is she wrong to live in this past? How much of that is present in her life? And part of that involves confronting the fact that just as this Jewish psychiatrist's family came from Lithuania and they made their home in modern England, you are confronted by these very different Palestinian communities than the ones you had anticipated. There's a lot of comedy about the Palestinian Authority community in Ramallah, but you also are struck by some of the young Palestinians, the degree to which this narrative or this history is not so important to them. And so I want to, and part of the extension of spirit that you have in this book is to say, not that you would ever say something as insensitive as that psychiatrist to let things go, but tell me about those different communities and the ways that communities have disappointed you, if they have, in terms of holding on to this central, fundamental experience.
Yeah, you see, the problem is, which you recognize afterwards when you look around you, is that the Palestinian people who, before 1948, were a cohesive, single people living in their country, because of Israel, had been transformed into a fragmented series of communities all over the place. So you had the community under occupation, which is the one that I joined in 2005 in Ramallah, and as you say, with the ruled, but not ruled, with the Palestinian Authority. And that was one experience.
Radha was working, the book involves, the sort of comic narrative of the book is Radha is working on on getting out media relations for the Palestinian Authority in Ramallah. So
that's right.
In 2005, 2006,
yeah,
2007.
Well, in 2005, in fact, before Hamas government was elected in 2006. Yes, I'd gone out because of the return. I kept thinking, surely it's not the proper return, it's a partial return, but it's a return of some kind. So I went in 2005, working for the Palestinian Authority as this media consultant, and came across this community of Palestinians, the ones under occupation, and they were, you know, people who in Ramallah were living in a bubble. It's quite extraordinary. You know, I joined them, and I promise you, if you had done the same, you would find yourself in a place which was virtually normal. Nice things happened. There were bistros and cafes and restaurants. You know, you could have a lot of fun. And that was fine until you tried to get out of Ramallah. So the moment you did that, you came upon an Israeli checkpoint, and so on. So there was that lot of people. And then around me, RP or our communities, Palestinians in Britain, Palestinians in the United States, Palestinians in other European countries, Palestinians in South America. Each of these communities has developed a kind of lifestyle. You can't blame them, I understand. You know, you can't forever be sitting there hoping and moaning and crying and saying, you know, we want to go back. People had formed lives. Of course they'd made lives. They had roots, new roots. Their children were at school. Their children were getting married, very often to the people among the society that they were living in. This is all entirely natural. But of course the question for me was, where does that leave the Palestinian cause? Who's going to carry the Palestinian cause if we've been so divided from each other? And that, you know, is, of course, Israel's purpose all along. And the tragedy is that it seemed to have largely succeeded.
I feel that we have to, part of our job in giving the audience your wisdom is that we have to leave them with, or give them something of your observations of the current politics of the occupation and of the conflict, things that aren't in this book. This is obviously a very important moment or this is an important moment in the life of the conflict. What's going on? What are we seeing over there right now? And how do you think these matters are going to develop in the near future?
Yeah, well, you know, for a while in recent times, the Palestinian story seemed to have disappeared from the front pages. The reason, of course, is the Syrian crisis and the migration crisis in Europe and all of that. That kind of edged the Palestinian story off the page. And you know, one of the things I can't help observing, one of the things that I really couldn't get over was in all the talk about refugees, Syrian refugees, and in all the new understanding on the part of ordinary people that there are such things as refugees and they may be registered with UNHCR or not registered, all this stuff they started to learn, not one mention of the Palestinian refugees. Isn't it striking? Not one, the oldest refugee community in the world. However, it was not long before the Palestinians were back on the front page, as is usually the case. And as you have observed, if you follow it at all, is that there are riots in Jerusalem. They've spread to parts of the West Bank. They've spread to Gaza. And these riots are destabilizing to the Israelis. They are alarmed by them. They react, as usual, with overwhelming force, which is not going to solve the problem. And I would forgive anybody for thinking, what the hell is this about? You know, they're writing and they're trying to keep order, and it's 6 of one, half a dozen of the other.
Plague on both their houses.
Absolutely, and people really are fed up with it. But what's happened all along, not only with these events, but every other news event that has happened involving the Palestinians, and I'm sure you know this very well from the publication, excellent publication that you produced, there is never any context, there's never any history. Nobody understands how this happened, why it happened. It's just sort of, every time it's something, you know, hits you in the face, oh no, not them again, don't understand a thing. But of course, you know, it's clear what's happening here to people who know. It's not a mystery. The Palestinians cannot see any way out for themselves. This occupation by by Israel, has lasted for nearly 50 years. I mean, you know, you've got to ask yourself, how much longer is this going to go on? And that's what the Palestinians feel. Is there ever any end to this? Now, it doesn't take a great genius to see that if people have that sort of life experience, if they cannot see any way out, what do? Of course they get enraged. Of course they break out with fury, and they attack their enemy, the enemy who's brought this on them. And the interesting thing about this is that it's generally individual acts, not an organized campaign. You know, individual people, young men usually, who go out and attack an Israeli. And it's exactly what you'd expect from a situation like the one I've described, when you're fed up and your leadership doesn't do anything for you, there are no proper political movements among you that you can adhere to. What do? And so really that is the background to this. And the solution, of course, is very clear. It's not, as John Kerry and all these European leaders say, oh, let us restore calm, we urge both sides to control the situation, and so on. Of course not, it's rubbish. The way you deal with it is by solving the roots of it, the cause, which nobody wants to confront. I mean by nobody, I mean on the Western side of the world, doesn't want to confront, which is Israel and its behavior and its oppression. That's what's wrong.
Rana, I think that I don't want to you shouldn't sell your own efforts at consciousness raising short. And your books have been a great effort at that. And the storytelling here all brings people to an understanding of, the scenes. I have to say, the scenes from Qualquilia, from the village, and other scenes of occupation are just so painful. I mean, surrounded by the wall, and the observations of people who are ingratiating themselves with the Israelis. Many of those observations throughout the book, people in the PA ingratiating themselves, individuals ingratiating themselves, and Rada at once, at the same time, condemns this and exposes this, but also shows some sympathy for these people who are doing this. But I want to change the frame a little on this and ask, you're English, right? You're not?
Hardly.
You're hardly English?
Hardly, no.
Okay.
I mean, I live in England. I'm anglicized, but I'm Palestinian.
I see. Okay. Well, I'm curious about your identity, and I'm also curious about, to the extent that you and I and many of the people in this room are engaged in the same enterprise, which is we live in the West, and we are trying to raise consciousness in the West. And your community, I should think, in England includes a great number of Jews and Zionists. What are those interactions like? And are you gaining any type of encouragement from recent events? Do you have any faith that this context is actually being discovered by people in the West?
Do you mean in terms of cooperation with Jews, or do you mean in general?
I mean I asked first about your social milieu. I don't know what that is in England. I'd like to know whether you've observed changes in just how people, there's that great scene where forget about it, get over it. I mean, that's a grotesque interaction. But before we began this conversation, you showed me the letter in The Guardian signed by over 300 academics calling for academic boycott of Israel. I mean, and you were offering this as, and obviously it's a landmark. We're seeing more and more support for BDS, and I'm wondering if you see that in your social milieu, if you can make it, not talk so much about the letter in The Guardian, but if you can do the job that you do in this book and make it real to us about whether you see these changes.
Yeah, I mean, I tell you, of course I've lived most of my life in Britain, and I'm very familiar with European opinion about Zionists and about Zionism in Israel. For the first time, I honestly can tell you, for the first time in all the years that I have spent in England, I feel optimistic for the first time. And the reason is that there's been a sea change in popular opinion. I'm not talking about governments. I'm talking about people. The people of, certainly in England and in Europe, have become more conscious, more aware of the Palestinians as a wronged people, as a people who need justice, in a way that never happened before. Now, I personally think it was Gaza that was responsible for this. I really do. Because the assault on Gaza by the Israelis in 2008, and then second one in 2014, had such an effect on people. It was so brutal, it was so blatant, and people felt total sympathy. So yes, there really is a change, not just in those people, but in my milieu, as you put it, which is obviously, you might say, has a number of academics in it and activists, etc. There's a much better understanding of what's happening, but there's also a, how can I put it, and this I think is the most promising, a kind of embarrassment on the part of Zionists. Now, I never used to see that before. You know, you'd go and give a talk about Palestine, and there'd be a load of Zionists heckling you and shouting and so on, very sure of themselves. Today, if you go in England, certainly, you go and give a talk about Palestine, if they're there, they never open their mouths. So, to me, this is extremely significant, that they're in retreat, and they are aware in some kind of dim way that they can't promote their message as they used to. And that's also, you know, extremely promising.
In both Married to Another Man and Return, you make it clear that you support one democratic state in Israel and Palestine, in historic Palestine. And one of the great things about this book, I think, is that you don't say that this is not utopian, but you recognize what a difficult passage this is going to be. How do you feel about? Can you state this in your own words? I'm paraphrasing you. Can you tell me what I've gotten wrong and right, and give us a sense of how far we are from? I mean, one of the painful moments in this book is when Ghada's father dies at 101 or 2.
102.
102 in Amman. And this is a man of just, it's just a wonderful portrait of this man of great intellectual distinction and a very fine mind, who's correcting his daughter even when you're in your 50s and 60s. She will come up with a point about, she's in Amman, and she's sort of irritated by some of the traditional forms of dress that she regards as the Islamization of a great culture, and she just comes back to the place, to her father's house, and she's just going off about what these women were wearing, and her father corrects her, or offers a greater degree of nuance and political understanding. We can actually, I'd like you to elaborate on that. I brought it up more to say, he's 102 and he dies, and his dream is unfulfilled. The thing that he gave his life to, of returning to this place that was so important to him, unfulfilled. And Ghada says, you know, will it be unfulfilled for me too, is this painful question. And so I'm asking you two questions. Can you tell us about the one-state answer and where we are on that? And then also, can you tell us a little about your father?
Yeah, I mean, maybe I'll say something about my father first and then talk about the one-state thing. Yes, as you described very accurately, my father was a scholar, and he was very influential because he worked for the BBC Arabic service for many years. And he developed a literary program which nobody in this audience probably has heard of, because it was in Arabic. And it went out weekly. And it was so popular that when he retired, the BBC retained him to continue doing this program, because it is such a large audience. And, you know, he was very well known as a result of that. He had...
Hassan, I'm sorry, his name?
Yes, his name was Ghada Karmi. And for us children, he was a very dominant figure, and we were fascinated by his ideas, and in fact repeated them. We regurgitated them, and we talked to people about them as if they were our own. And as you say quite rightly, that incident, which was extraordinary. I was in Amman, and it was Friday, you know, people were at the mosque and so on, and I took a walk, and as I was coming back, I saw this sight. And it was a man and a woman seated on two, a couple of plastic chairs in the forecourt of a rather modest hotel. And it was hot, it was really hot. And the man was wearing a dishdashi, you know what I mean, like a gown thing. And this was, he had pulled it up to kind of aerate him. I'm trying to put this delicately. And next to him was this woman, I presume his wife, who was covered in black from head to foot. And she was so thick, the veil, I don't know how she was breathing. And I looked at that, and to me, it made me so angry. I thought, have we come to this? Is this the great Arab dream, the Arab awakening, Arab nationalism? Is this what it is? And I went home, and I was in absolute fury. And I remember going in and saying to my, as you say, venting my anger and saying, what is this? How are we going to defeat Israel with these men with beards and these women all covered up? How the hell Are you going to do anything, succeed in anything like this? And I well remember he ticked me off. And I remember feeling, as I used to as a child, and he said, listen, you need to understand what this is about. And he said, you need to understand that the West is imperialist. It has conquered these lands. It has pillaged. It has stolen their resources. It has left the people with nothing, not even self-respect. They were forced to resort to the only thing they had left, Islam. And he said to me, and would you take that away from them too? And I remember feeling, you know, quite humbled, and I said no more about it. Now, your question was about the one state.
But before we get to that, just because I'm so relentlessly psychological and this work is so psychological, can you tell us how, in the book, you relate how each of the children, there are 3 children in the family, you have a brother and a sister, can you tell us how each of them has adjusted to this tremendous blow, which was the disintegration of their home and their expulsion? Each of them has chosen a different path. Can you tell us about those paths and how you, and there's a sense of the family being atomized. Unlike Palestinian families traditionally were so integrated in the village and in generations, and here's a family that in part, I guess, well, for a number of reasons, is somewhat atomized. There's a pain and sadness. Can you tell us about each of your siblings?
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, you know, what 1948 did to us was that it smashed our society, smashed it to pieces, and, you know, people really need to understand that. As a result, the trauma of that was so profound that the Palestinians themselves never talked about it or wrote adequately about it because they were so traumatized, in my reading, for so long they couldn't bear to recreate the past. And as you pointed out, the result, of course, the physical result of all this was a fragmentation, a smashing of the family unit, of the extended family. You know, and the sad thing for us was, had we stayed, we used to say, you know, we didn't get on with our parents, let's say, and but we had nobody to turn to. So if you were unhappy with your parents for any reason, in our society, as it had been, we could have gone to our aunties, our uncles, our cousins. In England, there was nothing. There was just us, this small family, this nuclear family. Now, yes, it's a very good question. How did each of us react to this enormous trauma?
And tell us the ages they were when they left.
Yes, they were. My siblings were older than me. My sister was the eldest of us. She was about 17, I think, and my brother was about 12, 13. And when we came to England, we were so busy trying to adjust to this new environment. I couldn't speak English. My brother couldn't speak English. My sister could, because she learned it at school, and my father did, obviously. But it was hopeless. I couldn't understand anything, and they put me in a school, and it was miserable. I didn't know where I was supposed to eat, or where my classrooms were. You know, you can imagine. Okay, so how did we deal with it? Well, you're right. We dealt with it in our own different ways. My sister took the traditional path. She was very devoutly religious. She took herself off to Syria when she was in her 20s, and she joined my uncle's family. Though it wasn't Palestine, it was Arab, and it was an Arab society. And she married a fellow Palestinian and had 4 children and led a traditional life. My brother, who really was extremely disoriented, I think, went to work abroad. He was an engineer and ended up in Denmark because he met a woman while abroad who was Danish, fell in love with her, and she, as it were, took him back with her to her country. But they ended up, let me see how they, anyway, you can see, or you read in the book, I've had a lot of difficulties, a lot of unhappiness, etc. But you see, in the end, my sister and her children came back to England. My brother and his wife came back to England. Each one was living in a different part of the country, so we were still fragmented. And I think we represent in microcosm, the macrocosmic reality of the way that Palestinian cohesive society, cohesive families were transformed into these atoms. And that is something which, as you said at the beginning, my sister, that is the thing that really rankles with her. And that is why she said that day to me, why should we end up, each one living here, there, without our own family with us, without, when we die, we cannot be buried in our country, we cannot see, my parents never saw their children, grandchildren in one place, you know, all this. And that is when she said, may God Almighty ruin their lives as they have ruined ours. And she wasn't a woman given to passion or oratory, but you could see how terrible that was to hear that outrage and the anger in her voice.
I would like you to answer the question about one state. Then I would like you to read a short portion of your book.
Yeah, the one state. Well, you know, that's something I've written about in articles many times, and my book, Married to Another Man, deals with it. Yeah, I mean, what do I think is the ultimate future of this terrible situation? Well, it seems to me there is only one. There is only one, which is that you don't partition Palestine and you don't coop up Palestinians in a fifth of the country and you give the Zionists 4/5 of the country. I mean, what kind of justice is that? What kind of solution is that? It's pretty hopeless. And don't forget the refugees, which I didn't talk about, the refugees in their camps. These poor people, 5 to 6 million of them, stranded, suspended in these refugee camps. They've got to go home. How are they going to go home to a fifth of the original Palestinian homeland? It's just absurd. Therefore, what else is left? Well, what else is left is that the country has to remain one, and it's the homeland of the Palestinians and the returnees, people like refugees, people like me. That is our homeland. And there is an Israeli Jewish community living in that land. Now, you cannot do to them what they did to us. You do not aspire to expel them and forbid them to return as they did to us. You say, well, you're here, let's share it. Let's live together. And let's have a democratic state. We don't want religious this and religious that, just as you might have in, I don't know, in Britain, in European countries, liberal democracies, where irrespective of your religion, irrespective of your origin, you hold citizenship of that country and you are equal before the law. That, I saw, was the only way forward. And you know, it's funny, I have to say to you, that when I first started writing about this, people, you know, were very hostile, said, what nonsense, and this is impossible, and Israel would never agree, and you're utopian, and you're a dreamer.
When was that you first...
I'll tell you, 1991. The first article, I mean, nobody was talking about this. In the 90s, people started to talk vaguely about binationalism, and then from 2000 onwards, the idea caught on. And now, of course, it's in popular discourse, it's in political discourse. It's not any longer a very strange idea. But the reason I said to you, it's funny how events change things. You know, Israel, Palestine, whatever you want to call it, is one state today. It's one state. But it's all ruled by Israel, isn't it? The people under occupation, the people before 1967, all one state. The only problem is that the one state is an apartheid state. It doesn't give non-Jews any rights, and it gives Jews rights. So this is the real situation, and our struggle has to be towards changing it from an apartheid situation to a democracy. That is the coming struggle. But I could go on talking about that, and I don't want to...
So will you read a little from the book, and then will anyone who wants to ask a question or make a statement we'd like to hear from you.
Well, you see, I don't know. I hope. Do people want to hear something from this book? It's the first one. Yeah, thanks. Now, in this, I've been, as you'll see, thanks. As you'll see, when there are 2 chapters in this book about Gaza. When I went to visit Gaza in 2005, and I was absolutely horrified. It was the most saddest place. It was tragic. I mean, there's no other word to describe it. And I looked around me and I saw the impoverishment, the way people were penned in, the difficulty in movement to get out or do anything. The Israeli army, of course, was inside Gaza at that time, and the way they controlled everything. And I went mad, you know, one day. I thought, this is all man-made. This impoverishment, the miserable lives these people live are deliberately created for them. And why? What have they done? Anyway, it was that one morning I was in the hotel, and I got up. I thought I'd take a walk early before it got very hot. And I walked out of the hotel. The Israeli soldiers in their watchtowers were awake like me. And I wondered how they felt as they watched the people below living in such dilapidation and poverty, just a few miles from their own modern, prosperous towns. Did they think those people wanted to live like that? For one mad moment, I wanted to shout up at them, to come and talk to me, to drag them down from their watchtowers by their bulletproof vests and their guns and their walkie-talkies. I wanted to push my face up against theirs and shout, "Look around you, properly. These are human beings here, not beasts, not vermin. They want to live decent lives like you. Understand?" And you know, I was in, as you can see, I was in such agitation. I had to walk past the watchtower, and I had to walk quickly, and then until the feeling dissipated and I calmed down. So, as you'll see, I hope when you read the book, this was the sort of feelings evoked in me, and what I very much wanted to convey, as throughout the book, that the reader would see it through my eyes, that I was seeing it as an outsider, actually. I'm not a Gazan. And so the reader would be with me, also looking at these sites, and I would imagine feeling the same way as I did.
That was such a great performance, Ghada, what you just read, as it was really enjoyable. And, I mean, horrifying and enjoyable. I wonder, I feel that you won't be indulging our attention, you'd be entertaining us. Well, do you mind reading the other passage that you had selected, the one toward the end?
No, not at all, because I always think that it's very good for people to get a feel for what the book is like. Now, maybe you can do what you did before. Right. Now, I'd come, it's towards the end of the book. I had seen what I saw. On the one hand, the Palestinian Authority and these pretend lives, you know, pretend president, pretend prime minister, when you know these aren't real. So that was very, very peculiar. And at the same time, juxtaposed against the terrible reality, the Qalqilia, which you mentioned, entirely closed in by the wall, Gaza, which I've just talked to you about. And I felt very bad, and I was obsessed by the idea of return. How are we going to return to this mess, you know? For me, return was at the heart of the issue. Without it, the injustice that had blighted our lives for generations would never cease. I knew there were formidable practical difficulties in the way of our return, an aim that seemed ever more unattainable with the passage of time. But I was determined that Israel should never be allowed to get away with what it had done. Despite the resignation and defeatism of the Palestinian official stance and the indifference and cynicism I saw amongst many Palestinians around me, I never once doubted the rightness of my position, or that the crime committed against us in 1948 would somehow be redressed. I could not have lived with myself if I had thought differently. Such an injustice could not be allowed to stand for good, and the perpetrators would sooner or later have to give up their gains. The Palestinian refugee camps, which still stood after more than half a century, not one of them ever closed down, bore eloquent testimony to an unfinished business that would have to find its proper conclusion. But now, for the first time, my core belief in that certainty began to falter. I thought about the exiled Palestinian communities long settled in Britain, Europe, America, and elsewhere. They were well established, and although they still remained devoted to what they called the cause of Palestine, and many of their children too, they went on entrenching themselves ever more deeply in their adopted countries. Many had found a workable accommodation for their commitment to the cause in the form of various activities and charitable works. These would not bring Palestine back, but it was a comfortable compromise that satisfied the demands of conscience and did not upset the tenor of everyday life. I could see this situation continuing for good. What cause did such exiles really adhere to? And how likely was it that any of them, so comfortably settled, would truly strive for the right of return? Could the refugees trapped in their camps, helpless and still dreaming of return, make anything happen? Would those whose primary concern was not the right of return, but the struggle against Israel's occupation and how to end it? Had Israel kept us out of our homeland for so long that we were forced to make alternative lives and thus suspend indefinitely our right of return? And in such circumstances, would any of us ever go back? The thought was unendurable. Even to contemplate it sickened me.
So, well, that was really great. That was great.
Thank you.
I wonder if there's anyone in the audience who has anything to say, or anyone who has questions. Please, now's the time.
So your question is, what can such people do, or what can your generation do? I have to tell you, I think your generation is great. There are many things you can do, many. You can, first of all, reconnect with the people left behind. You know, there are many things, in many demands in refugee camps for help, for people coming to teach, for, you know, I think many young people who don't really know what the situation is can do so in the summer. They can get summer assignments, go to the camps, 1. 2, they can actually go to the occupied territories. They can visit. They can see what it's like, what can be done, what should be done. And engage in BDS. I mean, there are many different things you can do. And later on, you can write, you can agitate, you can make your presence felt. Look, this is really very difficult. It's a question that has come up again and again throughout my activist life. You know, how can we reverse the negative image that people have of the Palestinians? And you're quite right that the term terrorist has been very useful for the Zionists, which they have plastered onto the Palestinians, whatever they do. You see, the problem is, remember that the Zionists, this message, which is so damaging to the Palestinians, is not something that the Zionists were able to pull off in a day and a night. This is the result of very hard, dedicated work on the part of the Zionists. They have a propaganda machine which they have built up, they have spent a lot of money on, and they maintain day and night. Where can you find a parallel thing like this on our side? You can't. You can't even find something much simpler than that in order to reverse these images. They're not that difficult to reverse, I assure you, if enough people were working and knowing what they did, you know. And although I want more questions, but let me tell you very quickly that a very instructive incident, which explains what I'm saying, is in London, I remember once complaining to a very well-known BBC not official, he was a presenter. And he was quite sympathetic. And I remember saying to him something like you're saying, for God's sake, how could he said, listen, you people, let me give you a very simple example, he said. When something happens that is an event in the Israel-Palestine thing, within minutes, our desks are flooded with briefings from the Zionists. So that when we do the program, we have already been told that this had happened. We rarely hear from the other side at all. And I remember he gave me a very valuable bit of advice. He said, news is made before the news bulletins come out. We, that is all the news people, the producers and so on, get together in an editorial meeting. And at that point, they decide which bit of news would be made prominent, which would be discussed. He said, now, if you could get those briefings to us, to this editorial meeting, as it's happening, then they'll look at this and they will get this background thing which says, the thing at the Aqsa Mosque happened because this, that, and the other. He said, we'll do it because we're lazy. Here it is in front of us and we'll use it. So you see, I'm giving you an example of the kind of work which actually, I'm afraid, has not been done often. It has, you know, from time to time, but really not often enough. Some of the Zionists, or many of them actually, tried to buy land. They did try. Now, in most cases, they were rebuffed. Nobody was going to sell their land to these invaders. But they did succeed in buying some land. And by 1948, something like they owned something like 6.4%, something like that. That was all that they owned after all those years of trying. As for anybody offering the Palestinians compensation, I think that's what you said. Oh, well, what can I tell you? What a joke. Nobody. Nobody then, nobody now. And these poor refugees, back to the refugees, not 1 cent in compensation for all that they lost and all that they suffered. And quite apart from people like me, exactly the same fate. The right of return, is that going to be done?
Will BDS, well, the second part of the question was, will BDS bring about the right of return, or do you think that that's a cause for further struggle? And the first part, as I understood it, was to what degree is compensation and restoration of property, how much of that is when you speak of the right of return, how much do you accept that as part of the process? Yeah,
look, first of all, the question of the right of return is underpinned by international law. So it's not just people, you know, who talk about it just because they, you know, they want to do it. There is a UN resolution which made it very clear that the people who had been displaced have to be repatriated and compensated. That's in the UN resolution. And indeed, that would be the right thing to do. The people would be allowed to return physically, and that their losses would be compensated for. And where they had lost, they would be, things would be restored if it was possible. So people recognized a lot has changed. And I've often said to people who say to you, when you say that, a lot of people say to you, oh yeah, but if you really looked at it, if they had the right, very few people would actually go back. Now, in fact, there is some truth in that, because people like I've just described to you, the settled communities in Europe, in the world and so on, might not opt to close down their lives, the ones that they've made, and go. But the issue here is not that. The issue is that they have the right to if they want to. That's really what that's about. So, yeah, so now that was the first part of his question. No, BDS, yes. BDS is not, it's something whose aims are very clear. It's to get Israel to abide by international law. So if you interpret that, if you look at that, actually yes, because there is an international obligation for them to repatriate the Palestinians. So it's actually included in that without being spelled out.
I just want moderator's privilege here. We are in the real estate capital of the United States, and the world maybe, and people here know a lot about real estate. I want you to the extent that you are able to, can you tell me how much a house like yours in Kataman, how much that sells for now in Jerusalem?
I don't have those figures. I know that houses like ours are very, very highly prized in Israeli society, but they consider them to be very antique, you know.
They're called Arab houses, right?
They are called Arab houses, and people, it's a mark of prestige if you get one of these houses. And I presume, I understand that they're very expensive. I can't honestly tell you how much it is in dollars, but they're very expensive. Now, of course, the issue is that we were never compensated, but not by 1 cent. Not only when the properties were taken over, but certainly at no time subsequently. And by the way, many Palestinians had money in the bank. All that money was just taken. The Zionists helped themselves to it. Nobody has ever received any compensation for that.
Thank you.
What a question. I wish I knew. I really wish. I've never seen a more servile response to Israel than I have seen in this country. It's absolutely disgraceful. You know, it's so bad. I think it's pathological. You know, one has to ask, what is this really all about? And I think it's so big, this problem is so big, that I'm not sure myself how it can be approached. Because, you know, I'm sorry, you really raised a really important issue, which is something that's bothered me for a long time. Why is the United States like this? Why are they so pro-Israeli? Why are they so, I've used the word servile, they are. What is that about? Now, when you talk about this to people, they will tell you, oh, Israel serves the imperialist purpose of the United States, that Israel is useful to the US, and that is why they get all this support from, as you say, from aspiring politics. Now, the other way to look at it, of course, is that the Zionists have bought up the American politicians while they pay them and make sure that they can continue their careers, or conversely can end their careers by what they do. You're not going to make any impact at all, you see, with something like that. There was a thought at one time that if the Arab side did the same, because after all, these congressmen, how it seems to me, is they're just for sale. So if you from the other side put in similar amounts of money or greater amounts of money, you'll buy their loyalty as well. Now, apart from the fact that it has not happened and it's not likely to happen, the reality is, the question is, why is this? Is it because the lobby, and I think Philip here can probably throw light on this, is it that the lobby is so powerful that it can bring about these results, or is it that Israel is useful to the United States, and therefore the US cannot abandon Israel? You know, which is it? So it is a huge problem, and I couldn't possibly give you an answer of how you can change your representative's mind, except in the usual channels. You know, you make representations, you write, you try to get at the researchers, all that sort of thing, kind of routine stuff.
Rana, did you have any last statement you wanted to make before you go and sell 50, 100, 200 copies of your book?
No, really, just to thank you for being such an interested and responsive audience. And I hope very much that indeed you will get the book and read it and enjoy it, if that's the right word. Thanks for your attention.
Thank you.